On April 25 of this year, Portugal celebrated 50 years of the Carnation Revolution, which overthrew a dictatorship that lasted 4 decades and paved the way for democracy. This revolution is often referred to as the Bloodless Revolution, since the death toll was extremely small, only 5 deaths. But there is an alternative interpretation, that the revolution didn't start in Portugal, but rather in Africa, where Portugal had been engaged in the colonial war in several countries since 1961. It was a colonial war that accelerated the end of the dictatorship in Portugal. After the revolution, a quick and rather chaotic decolonization took place, and 2 violent civil wars erupted in Angola and Mozambique. It might seem strange, but Portuguese people, especially young people, don't know much about the former Portuguese colonies, the colonial war, and its aftermath in Africa. I don't remember being taught that in school with any real depth, or spoken about as being very relevant. It is a subject that is mentioned more and more today, but I still know very little about it. That is why I was excited when I discovered that there was a whole animation film about at least one of the former colonies right after the decolonization process. Another Day of Life, an adaptation of the book by legendary journalist Ryszard Kapuściński. Another Day of Life takes place at a very sensitive historical moment. Angola, one of the largest African countries, is between colonization and independence in 1975. It uses animation to depict the horror of war in a way that is not sensationalist or overly graphic, and makes use of the medium to sprinkle the story with surrealism. This aesthetic was inspired by the writing of Ryszard Kapuściński, according to one of the directors. The very formula of Kapuściński's writing has mobilized us to a hybrid format. Kapuściński combines poetry, magical realism, and facts. He enters the head of an individual and describes the situation in the country and even the fate of the entire continent through the prism of his emotions. We, like him, collide facts with creation. Animation can be both realistic and fantastic, surreal. In my opinion, animation is poetry that will capture what the camera will not see, and what is, for example, in our thoughts, fantasies, fears. I think Another Day of Life is a fascinating film, and I wish there were more animation documentaries like that. But I was still disappointed by it. To understand why, I think it's important to do a quick recap of the historical context around the film. Portugal has the questionable honor of being the first and last European empire overseas. It started with small conquests in North Africa in the 1400s, and the last territory, Macau, actually only went back to China in 1999. By 1974, most of the Portuguese Empire was in Africa. It spanned 8 countries: Angola, Guinea-Bissau, Mozambique, Cape Verde, and São Tomé and Príncipe. Portuguese people always like to refer to their colonialism as being different from that of Britain, Spain, or France. The main reason for it is because Portuguese people mix with the local population. This idea that Portugal is somehow a more benevolent and even inclusive colonizer is the core of the concept of Lusotropicalism, a special skill that Portuguese people have for harmonious relations with other peoples, their adaptability to the tropics, and their inherent lack of prejudice. This might seem like an idea from a distant past, but I can guarantee you that many older people still talk about the colonial past in this way, even if they never heard the word Lusotropicalism. It's the reason why I grew up hearing that apartheid was a crazy idea of South Africans that would never happen in, quote, Portuguese Africa, where races lived together without prejudice. Or, for example, that Portuguese colonialism was much nicer than Spanish one because we didn't mass murder whole civilizations as they did in Central America, but actually mixed and created Brazil. Lusotropicalism was actually coined by a Brazilian sociologist, Gilberto Freire, and became the official narrative of the dictatorship. The supposed harmonious way of living was obviously bullshit. There is this truly amazing journalistic work by Joana Gurjão Henriques called Racismo em Português, or Racism in Portuguese, which focuses on the racism in the former Portuguese colonies in Africa during and after colonialism. If you read the reports that cover all Portuguese-speaking countries in Africa, it is shocking how much of the racist narrative persists and how much of a lie was the supposed inclusivity of the Portuguese colonies. For example, in many cities, Africans were not allowed in the city center after dark, and there was a class of supposedly civilized Africans who were given more privileges but never considered equal to whites. This journalistic series came out in 2016, and I think it was the first time I actually read in detail about Portuguese colonialism and its legacy. But I think Portuguese colonialism as a pervasive and violent force only really sunk in when I read the memoir by Isabella Figueiredo, Notebook of Colonial Memories. It's hard to describe this book. It is very, very well written, but it is also brutal. It's the memories of Isabella as a child living in today's Maputo, the capital of Mozambique. She doesn't soften the speech of the colonialists, her own family. It's a perspective of the Africa-born Portuguese middle class who, although they were not really wealthy, had a much better life in Africa than elsewhere in Portugal, and the inherent superiority and hostility towards the native African population. I think it is a very hard book to read as a Portuguese person, and I imagine it must be very hard to read as a Mozambican as well. By the time Ryszard Kapuściński travels to Angola and publishes Another Day of Life, the decolonization process is ongoing, where thousands of families like Isabella's were forced out of Africa. Decolonization was a tragedy for the white population, who became refugees in their supposed native country of Portugal, even though many had never stepped foot in it. In the Notebook of Colonial Memories, Isabella shares how the Africa-born Portuguese saw the European Portuguese. Portugal was dirty, ugly, pale, and freezing. The Portuguese from Portugal had minds filled with small ideas, oh how small and stupid and backward and scheming they were. So ugly, with rough skin and goosebumps, the extremities of their bodies damaged by cold and excess consumption of bacon with cabbage. Such sad people. So ugly, so mean-spirited, these Portuguese who stayed, marinated in jug wine, ugly, cheerless, poor, all light gone from their faces and hands. So small. For the Portuguese people who lived in the colonies, life was much better. It was freer, richer, more comfortable, warmer, more adventurous, while Portugal remained at the tail of Europe in every way. But no matter how difficult this exile might have been for the white Portuguese population, it can't compare with the violence and destruction of the civil war suffered by Angolans and Mozambicans as a result of a sloppy and rushed decolonization process. And that is what drew me to this film, to try to understand a bit of that history. Maybe that is why I was disappointed, when I realized that Another Day of Life was not really a documentary film about the civil war in Angola, or even about decolonization, but rather a film about Kapuściński. Well, actually, maybe it's not even about Kapuściński himself, since we hardly learn anything about his life, his motivations, his political convictions. It seems rather to be a eulogy to the now largely defunct profession of the war correspondent, and nostalgic for a time where it could generate real change, maybe even too much. The conflict in Angola is just a background for a tale where the actual hero is a European man, and where the real story seems to be the conflict between being a political militant in solidarity with revolutionary groups and the journalist who should report the truth. This is a weird choice, especially because in the book, although Kapuściński obviously adds his own thoughts, impressions, and reflections, he does not self-aggrandize at all. We often feel his fear, discouragement, and confusion, and we are just as relieved as he is when he is given permission by his editor to return home. Another thing that stood out to me as I watched the film is how little Angolans seem to be the agents of their own history. A lot of the people Kapuściński works with are white Angolans of Portuguese descent, or even Portuguese people who have just chosen to fight for the Angolans. It's the same case in the book, and in the film some characters even seem to have their race swapped to have more black African representation. One of the few Angolans who actually stands out is the rebel fighter Carlota, presented as a fascinating woman who is put in charge of accompanying the journalists during a particularly dangerous part of their journey. Carlota becomes a kind of symbol for the Angolan people, why they are fighting for freedom and all the hope they have, and her death seems to affect Kapuściński a lot. The film returns to her again and again as a way of eternalizing her role in history. However, as scholar Elia Santos mentions in an article in Voila, this use of Carlota as a symbol also shows the real limitations of this film as a way of engaging with this particularly difficult historical period. She writes, "In Another Day of Life, a Hollywood-esque aesthetic constructs and celebrates the hero Kapuściński. It will have the added value of bringing to the attention of new audiences the political chess game that was played in Angola at a regional and international scale. The action film style might particularly appeal to younger audiences. By focusing the narrative so reductively on the figure of the hero journalist, however, the film does not respond to Carlota's appeal and remains stuck in the dubious game of use and abuse, of memory and forgetting, which so often underlies the production of memories about this historical period." As someone who is passionate about animation and really believes in the potential of animation documentaries, Another Day of Life will always be a reference. But I think it is mostly an example of a potential that is still unfulfilled, rather than what we should emulate for the future. Thanks for watching, and if you're interested in more videos dealing with Portuguese colonialism or about how war correspondents and other so-called saviors are depicted in films about the Global South, just let me know. Thank you.